The phone rang at 3:17 a.m. on a cold February night in 1985. Tony Morrison had been a light sleeper for 20 years, ever since the night Muhammad Ali destroyed his career, his reputation, and his faith in everything he'd believed about loyalty and friendship. But when Morrison answered that late-night call, the last voice he expected to hear was the one that had haunted his dreams for 2 decades. "Tony," came the familiar voice, now slurred slightly by the early stages of Parkinson's disease. "It's Muhammad Ali. I need to tell you something I should have said 20 years ago." What happened in the next 47 minutes would heal wounds that had festered for decades, and prove that some apologies can literally save lives. To understand the 3 a.m. phone call, you have to go back to 1965 when Tony Morrison was a respected boxing trainer in Louisville. At 32, he'd guided fighters to championship contention and was known for his analytical approach to the sport. Morrison had grown up 6 blocks from Cassius Clay and had always hoped to train the local phenom. But Clay worked with Angelo Dundee, and the two trainers had developed a professional rivalry, where Dundee was charismatic and media-friendly. Morrison was quiet and technical. The animosity between the two trainers reached a breaking point in December 1965, when Morrison publicly criticized Dundee's preparation of Clay for his upcoming fight against Ernie Terrell. In an interview with Boxing Weekly, Morrison said Dundee was more concerned with making Clay a celebrity than making him a complete fighter. "Dundee's got raw talent to work with," Morrison told the reporter, "but he's wasting it on circus tricks and media stunts. That boy could be truly great, but he's being developed for entertainment instead of excellence." The comments weren't meant to be personal attacks on Clay, but that's how they were interpreted when the article was published. The headline read, "Local trainer says Clay is wasting his talent under Dundee's guidance." The article made it sound like Morrison had questioned Clay's intelligence and dedication, rather than Dundee's methods. Muhammad Ali, who was 23 years old and already developing his legendary sensitivity to perceived slights, read the article and was furious. He saw Morrison's comments as an attack on his character and his choices. Without speaking to Morrison directly or seeking clarification, Ali decided to respond publicly. At a press conference 3 days later, Ali launched a devastating verbal assault on Morrison. "Tony Morrison thinks he knows something about training fighters," Ali said with disdain. "Tony Morrison ain't never trained nobody worth training. Tony Morrison's fighters lose more than they win. Tony Morrison is jealous because Angelo Dundee got the greatest fighter in the world and Tony Morrison got nothing." Ali continued his attack with personal viciousness that shocked everyone present. "You want to know why Tony Morrison ain't got no good fighters? Because Tony Morrison ain't got no heart. Tony Morrison ain't got no vision. I wouldn't let Tony Morrison train a dog to sit up and beg, much less train a fighter." Ali saved his cruelest blow for last. "Tony Morrison talks about wasted talent, but the only wasted talent around here is Tony Morrison's talent for being a bitter, jealous old man who never made nothing of himself, and never will." For Morrison, watching Ali's attack was like being publicly executed. The impact on his career was immediate and catastrophic. Within a week, fighters left him. Gym owners treated him coolly. Promoters stopped returning calls. The personal impact was worse. Morrison fell into depression, started drinking heavily, and his marriage crumbled. "Muhammad Ali destroyed me with words more completely than he ever destroyed any opponent in the ring," Morrison would later tell his sister. By 1970, Morrison had left boxing altogether, taking a job as a PE teacher at a Louisville high school. For 20 years, Morrison followed Ali's career from a distance, watching the rise and fall of the greatest heavyweight with mixed admiration and resentment. Meanwhile, Ali's life had taken complicated turns. By 1985, he was struggling with early Parkinson's disease, financial problems, and the isolation of aging celebrity. His marriage was troubled, his health declining, and he suffered from insomnia that left him awake thinking about his life and the people he'd hurt over the years. On the night of February 12, 1985, Ali found himself thinking about Tony Morrison for the first time in years. He remembered the press conference, the cruel things he'd said, and the look of genuine hurt on Morrison's face when they'd encountered each other briefly at a boxing event a few years later. Ali had learned a lot about forgiveness and redemption since 1965. His Islamic faith had taught him about the importance of seeking forgiveness for wrongs committed. His own struggles with health and aging had given him perspective on the temporary nature of success and the permanent importance of treating people with dignity. His recent troubles had reminded him of what it felt like to be vulnerable and criticized. Sitting in his Chicago home at 3 a.m., Ali made a decision that surprised even him. He picked up the phone and called information, asking for Tony Morrison's number in Louisville. When the operator found the listing, Ali wrote it down and stared at it for 15 minutes before working up the courage to dial. Tony Morrison answered on the third ring, groggy and concerned. Phone calls at 3 a.m. usually meant emergencies or bad news. "Hello, Tony," Ali said, his voice immediately recognizable, despite the Parkinson's-related changes. "It's Muhammad Ali. I know it's late, but I need to talk to you." Morrison sat up in bed, instantly wide awake. For a moment he thought he might be dreaming. The voice he'd heard in his nightmares for 20 years was coming through his telephone at 3 a.m. "Muhammad," Morrison said carefully. "Is everything all right?" "No," Ali said quietly. "Everything's not all right. It hasn't been all right for a long time. And part of what's not all right is what I did to you 20 years ago." Morrison didn't respond. He honestly didn't know what to say. "Tony, are you still there?" "I'm here." "Good. Because I need you to listen to me. I need you to let me say something that I should have said 20 years ago, and I need you to really hear it." Ali paused, gathering his thoughts and his courage. "Tony, I was wrong. I was completely, totally, unforgivably wrong about what I said about you in that press conference. You didn't deserve what I said. You didn't deserve what I did to your career and your life. And I'm calling you at 3 in the morning because I can't sleep knowing that I hurt a good man and never had the courage to apologize for it." Morrison's throat tightened. He'd imagined this conversation hundreds of times over the years, but never thought it would actually happen. "You criticized Angelo's training methods," Ali continued, "and I took it as a personal attack on me. But it wasn't about me at all. You were just doing what good trainers do, analyzing techniques and trying to improve things. I was too young and too arrogant to understand the difference between professional criticism and personal attack." Morrison tried to interrupt, but Ali kept talking. "No, Tony, let me finish. Please. I destroyed your career because my feelings were hurt. I used my platform and my power to tear down a man who had never done anything wrong except have a professional opinion that was different from mine. That's not the behavior of a champion. That's not the behavior of a man. That's the behavior of a spoiled child who doesn't understand that his words have power to hurt people." Morrison was crying now, though he tried to keep it out of his voice. 20 years of anger and hurt were beginning to dissolve. "The things I said about you having no heart, no vision, no talent," Ali said, his own voice breaking. "Those things were lies. I knew they were lies when I said them. You had heart enough to speak the truth as you saw it, even though you knew it might cost you. You had vision enough to see techniques and strategies that might have helped me, and you had talent enough that I was threatened by your knowledge. I was jealous, Tony. I was jealous that you saw things Angelo didn't see. I was jealous that you understood aspects of boxing that I didn't understand. So I destroyed you instead of learning from you." Morrison finally found his voice. "Muhammad, why are you telling me this now?" "Because I'm sick, Tony. I got this disease that's making it harder for me to talk, harder to think clearly sometimes. And I realized that if I died without apologizing to you, I would have died as a smaller man than I want to be." Ali paused. "And because I found out you left boxing and became a school teacher, I took that away from you because I couldn't handle criticism." Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that surprised both of them. "Muhammad, can I tell you something?" "Of course. What you did to me hurt more than anything that ever happened to me in my life. It destroyed my career, my marriage, my confidence, everything I thought I was supposed to be. For years I hated you more than I've ever hated anyone." Ali listened, knowing he deserved every word. But Morrison continued. "It also forced me to find a different kind of purpose. Those kids I've been teaching for 20 years, some of them came from homes where nobody ever told them they had potential. Some of them had been written off by everybody else in their lives, and I was able to see their potential and help them develop it, not in boxing but in life." Morrison's voice was getting stronger, more confident. "I've had kids who were headed for drugs and gangs who ended up getting scholarships to college. I've had kids who thought they were worthless, who discovered they had talents they never knew about. I've had kids who needed someone to believe in them, and I was able to be that person." "Tony," Ali said softly, "what I'm saying, Muhammad, is that maybe what happened between us led me to where I was supposed to be all along. Maybe I was meant to train young people for life, instead of training fighters for the ring. Maybe what felt like destruction was actually redirection." Ali was quiet for a long moment, absorbing what Morrison had said. "You're a better man than I am, Tony. A better man than I ever was." "No," Morrison said firmly. "I'm a different kind of man than you are. You were meant to be a great fighter and a great figure in history. I was meant to be a teacher who helped kids believe in themselves. We both found our purpose, just not in the way we expected. Do you forgive me? Ali asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Muhammad, Morrison said, and his voice was full of warmth for the first time in 20 years. I forgave you the moment you said you were wrong. I've been waiting 20 years to hear those words. Not because I needed you to suffer, but because I needed to know that you understood you had hurt someone who never meant to hurt you. They talked for another half hour, sharing stories about their families, their struggles, and their growth. Ali told Morrison about his children, his hopes for them, his fears about his declining health. Morrison told Ali about specific students who had changed his perspective on what success really meant. When they finally said goodbye, both men felt lighter than they had in years. Ali had found peace in offering genuine contrition. Morrison had found closure in extending genuine forgiveness. The next morning, Morrison called in sick to school for the first time in a decade, spending the day thinking about forgiveness and the unexpected paths life takes. He walked around his small house, looking at it with new eyes, thinking about how different his life might have been, but also about how meaningful it had become in ways he'd never expected. 3 days later, Morrison received a package with Ali's signed photograph inscribed to Toni Morrison, a great trainer and a greater man. Thank you for teaching an old fighter about forgiveness, Muhammad Ali. Along with it was a $25,000 check with a note. This doesn't make up for what I cost you, but I hope it helps you help more kids. Morrison never cashed the check. Instead, he framed it and hung it in his classroom next to Ali's photograph. When students asked about them, he would tell them the story of how two men hurt each other, learned from their mistakes, and found their way to forgiveness and friendship. In 1996, when Ali lit the Olympic torch in Atlanta, Morrison watched with his students. When they saw Ali's hands shaking as he held the flame, Morrison told them about courage, about facing difficulties with dignity, and about the champion who had taught him that true strength comes from admitting when you're wrong. Morrison began incorporating the lesson of that phone call into his teaching. He would tell his students that everyone makes mistakes, that everyone hurts people sometimes, but that the measure of a person isn't whether they fall down, but whether they have courage to get back up and make things right. He would tell them that forgiveness isn't just about letting go of anger, but about giving people a chance to become better than they were. When Ali died in 2016, Toni Morrison was one of the pallbearers at his funeral. In his eulogy, Morrison said, "Muhammad Ali taught me that words have power to hurt, and we must be careful with that power. But more importantly, he taught me that words also have power to heal, and we must find the courage to use that power when we've caused harm." The Muhammad Ali who called me at 3 in the morning to apologize was a greater champion than the one who destroyed me 20 years earlier, because he had learned to fight for forgiveness instead of fighting for ego. The story of that 3 a.m. phone call became legendary in Louisville, passed down as an example of how even the deepest wounds can be healed when people find courage to admit their mistakes and seek forgiveness. It reminded everyone who heard it that champions aren't people who never fall down, but people who learn to help others up when they've been the ones to knock them down. Morrison continued teaching until he retired in 2005 at 72. In his retirement speech, he said that his greatest victory wasn't any fight he'd ever trained for, but the night he learned that forgiveness is more powerful than revenge, understanding is more valuable than being right, and some calls can change everything.